The door didn't make a sound when I pushed it. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. No creak. No resistance. Just a slow, obedient swing inward, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Cold air brushed my ankles. The smell hit next, damp stone, iron, something old and breathing. My candle flickered violently, throwing shadows that climbed the walls like desperate hands. I remember thinking how strange it was that fear didn't arrive all at once. Came in pieces. A tightening in my throat. A heaviness behind my eyes. A quiet voice inside me whispering, "Don't go any farther." But I did. Because behind me there was no life left to return to. My bare feet touched the first step. Stone. Wet. Slippery. I steadied myself, pressing my palm against the wall, feeling the chill sink straight into my bones. Somewhere below something moved. A breath. A sob. Or maybe it was only the building settling. Old places make sounds like living things when the world goes quiet. I counted each step as I descended. 1, 2, 3. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it would betray me. I kept expecting a shout, a bell, a hand yanking me backward into the light. None came. At the bottom, the candle revealed a hallway too narrow to turn around in. Doors lined the walls, wooden, scarred, each with a small barred opening at eye level. I couldn't see inside them. I could only feel what they held. Suffering has a temperature. Presses against the skin. A voice whispered my name. I nearly dropped the candle. Grace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. But it was real. And the sound of it cracked something open in me that had been sealed shut for months. "I'm here," I whispered back, though my knees were shaking. "I'm here." A pause. Then the softest sound of crying. That was when I understood. Whatever waited behind those doors was not meant to be seen. And whatever I was about to learn would change the shape of my life forever. 72 years later, I still wake up some nights with that smell in my nose and that voice in my ears. Tonight, rain taps against my bedroom window like it's asking permission to come inside. I sit on the edge of my bed, a photograph resting in my hands. Me at 7 years old, dressed in white, smiling like the world was gentle. My fingers tremble as I straighten the frame. It took me a lifetime to tell this story. Not because I forgot, but because remembering required courage I didn't have until now. My name is Grace M. Peterson, and today I turn 72. What I'm about to share is not a tale meant to entertain. It's a wound that never fully healed. A truth buried under obedience, silence, and fear. I grew up in a small clay house where the floor was dirt, and the walls leaked cold in winter. We had little, but my mother's hands were always warm. She washed clothes until her knuckles cracked, humming hymns under her breath like prayers stitched into the air. Love lived in her voice, even when hope didn't. My father believed fear was the same as faith. "God is watching," he'd say, his belt already folded in his hand. "And God punishes." The church stood at the highest point in town, its bell louder than any voice. When it rang, the whole place listened, especially girls like me. I was 19 when everything broke. 19 when a single dance became a sentence. 19 when my life was handed over in the name of holiness. I didn't know then that obedience could be weaponized. I didn't know faith could be twisted into a lock with no key. I only knew that the night I left my home, my mother didn't cry out loud, and that silence hurt more than any scream. I believed I was being sent somewhere to be fixed. I had no idea I was being buried alive. If the place I entered was meant to save my soul, why did it feel like every step forward was stripping my humanity away? The morning I left Promise Creek, the sky was painfully blue. Not the soft kind of blue that promises mercy, but the sharp, merciless kind that makes everything feel exposed. My mother stood by the doorway, her hands knotted inside her apron, eyes fixed on a crack in the dirt as if looking at me might shatter whatever strength she had left. She pressed a small metal into my palm. Cool metal worn smooth by years of prayer. "God will protect you," she whispered. I nodded because that was what obedient daughters did. But something inside me folded in on itself. I wanted her to say my name. Just once. I wanted her to tell me to run. She didn't. The truck that carried me away rattled like it was coming apart at the seams. Each bump lifted my body off the wooden bench, my teeth clicking together as I held my single suitcase between my knees. Inside it were a few dresses, a pair of shoes too thin for winter, and a rosary that still smelled faintly of my grandmother's lavender drawer. As Promise Creek disappeared behind dust and distance, I pressed my forehead against the glass and tried not to think about John's hands on mine, the warmth of that one stolen dance, the way hope had felt so light it scared me. No one spoke during the journey. Silence wrapped itself around me like a warning. After days of motion, roads, trains, unfamiliar stations, we arrived. The building rose out of the land like something grown rather than built. Tall stone walls. Narrow windows. No laughter. No color. Just gray upon gray, reaching upward like a prayer that had forgotten how to ask. The gates closed behind me with a sound I felt in my chest. A woman waited at the entrance. Tall. Severe. Her face was sharp in a way that made you want to shrink before she even spoke. She didn't smile. "Welcome," she said. "From now on you will learn obedience." Her eyes scanned me the way one inspects livestock. Not to know me, only to measure how much breaking I would require. They took my suitcase first. Then they took my clothes. Then my hair. I watched black strands fall to the floor, my reflection growing more unfamiliar with every cut. No one asked how I felt. No one warned me. Cold water followed, shocking my skin until I gasped. Rough fabric replaced softness. The mirror they handed me back showed a stranger. Eyes too big, neck too bare, shame clinging like a second skin. "Grace is no longer your name," the woman said flatly. "You are reborn here." Reborn. The word tasted like rust. That night, I lay on a mattress thin enough to feel every slat beneath it. The room smelled of damp stone and soap. No pictures. No windows low enough to reach. Just walls that felt like they leaned inward when I closed my eyes. I tried to pray. The words wouldn't come. Around me the building breathed, pipes groaning, footsteps echoing. Distant sobs swallowed quickly by the dark. I pulled my knees to my chest, fighting the urge to cry aloud. Tears here felt dangerous. Weakness always does in places that worship control. Days began to blur into one another. Bells dictated every breath. When to rise. When to kneel. When to eat. When to lower your eyes. Hunger became a constant companion. A dull ache that made obedience easier. Silence was enforced with punishment. Questions were sins. Memories were treated like infections to be cured. I learned quickly how to disappear. How to move without sound. How to keep my thoughts folded deep inside where no one could touch them. I told myself this was temporary. That endurance was holy. That if I proved myself small enough, quiet enough, I might one day be allowed to leave. Then, one afternoon in the laundry room, someone brushed past me and let something fall into my apron. A scrap of paper. 2 words written in a trembling hand. "Be careful." I looked up, but whoever had dropped it was already gone. And for the first time since the gates closed behind me, I felt something stir that frightened me more than punishment ever had. Hope. Who was trying to warn me? And what did they know that I hadn't yet dared to imagine? I learned quickly that survival did not belong to the loudest or the strongest. It belonged to the observant. To the girls who learned when to lower their eyes, when to slow their steps, when to make themselves invisible. In that place, silence was not peace, it was currency. The more of yourself you gave up, the less attention you attracted. And attention was dangerous. The days followed a rhythm so rigid it carved itself into my bones. Bells ruled everything. One sharp ring before dawn dragged us from sleep. Another forced us to our knees on the cold floor, where prayer was less about devotion and more about endurance. We prayed until our legs trembled, until thoughts dissolved into numb repetition. Food was rationed, measured like a test of faith. Stale bread. Watery milk. Hunger sharpened our obedience. When your body is empty, resistance feels like an unnecessary luxury. There were many girls there. Some barely old enough to understand why they had been sent. Others, like me, old enough to know something was wrong but young enough to feel powerless to change it. We were never encouraged to speak of who we were before. Past lives were treated like sins we had to starve out. That was when I met Rose. It happened over soap and steam, our hands raw from scrubbing linens in silence. She was assigned beside me one morning. Dark eyes, sharp with a kind of awareness I hadn't seen in weeks. She didn't look broken. She looked watchful. When the overseer turned her back, Rose leaned close enough that I could feel her breath. "Don't tell the truth in confession," she whispered. My heart stuttered. "What?" I mouthed. She didn't answer. Just straightened, expression empty once more, as if nothing had happened. I didn't understand her warning until the next time I knelt in that small wooden booth, hands folded, heart aching with homesickness. I confessed what I thought were harmless thoughts, that I missed my mother, that I still dreamed of my old life, that sometimes I felt lost. The following morning I was summoned. They already knew everything. The ruler came down on my palms with a sharp crack, pain exploding up my arms as I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. 10 strikes. Then 10 more. Each one accompanied by a reminder that longing was rebellion, that memory was disobedience. Thank us, they demanded. And I did. Not because I believed them, but because survival required submission. That was the day I understood the unspoken rules. Confession was not sacred. Silence was not safety. And obedience would never protect us. At night the building changed. The hallways grew heavier. Footsteps echoed longer than they should. Doors opened softly, carefully. I lay frozen on my mattress, staring into the dark, listening to sounds I didn't yet have the courage to name. Then came the night of the storm. Thunder rolled so close it shook the walls. I couldn't sleep. Lightning briefly illuminated the corridor through the crack beneath my door. And that was when I saw it. A shadow paused outside a nearby room. Another joined it. A door opened. The crying that followed was muffled, swallowed quickly, as if the walls themselves were complicit. The next morning, the girl from that room didn't appear at prayers. When I asked, I was told to pray harder. Rose found me later, eyes darker than before. "It's happening," she said quietly. "And it's been happening for years." My chest tightened. "Why doesn't anyone stop it?" She looked at me like I had asked why the sky was allowed to fall. "Because we are easy to erase," she replied. "Because they call this God." From that moment on, fear was no longer my greatest enemy. Anger was. It burned slow and steady in my chest, fueling something dangerous. Something that refused to stay quiet. I began to notice things. Locked doors never mentioned, whispers cut short, girls disappearing and returning hollow-eyed, or not returning at all. And beneath the chapel, there were rumors. A place no one spoke of unless they wanted punishment. A place where cries went unanswered. I didn't want to believe it. But belief, I was learning, was not what kept us alive. Truth was. If the walls had ears and the doors had secrets, what waited beneath the place we were taught to kneel? Once you suspect the truth, everything begins to look different. The hallways didn't just feel narrow anymore. They felt intentional. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was enforced. Even the prayers changed shape in my mind. I still moved my lips when required, still bowed my head, still knelt until my joints screamed, but inside I was listening, watching, counting. I started noticing which doors were never assigned for cleaning, which corridors we were told to pass through quickly, which girls returned from spiritual correction, with eyes that no longer focused on the world in front of them. Rose and I spoke rarely, and only when necessity forced us close. Our glances did most of the talking. Fear teaches you efficiency. One afternoon, while polishing the chapel floors, Rose let her rag fall near the back wall. As she bent to retrieve it, she traced a small sign into the dust with her finger, an almost invisible mark where stone met stone. "Behind the confessional," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "I've seen them unlock it." My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. "What's there?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "Something they don't want witnesses to." That night I dreamed of doors. Endless doors. Each one locked. Each one breathing. The next days were filled with frantic preparation. Not outwardly, but inside us. We pretended better than before. Obedience sharpened. Movements became slower, softer. Even our eyes learned when not to linger. Then came the announcement. Visitors were coming. Important ones. The entire convent shifted into controlled chaos. Floors scrubbed raw. Windows polished until the light hurt your eyes. The overseers' voices grew brittle with forced sweetness. It was the first time I saw fear on their faces, and it terrified me more than their cruelty ever had. I overheard whispers while carrying linens past the kitchen. "They can't be seen like that. Lock them below until it's over. Make sure they're gone before dawn." Below. That word lodged in my chest like a splinter. That night, Rose found me near the wash basins, her face pale but resolute. "It's real," she said. "There is a place under the chapel." My throat went dry. Who's there? Girls who tried to resist. Girls who got sick. Girls who couldn't stay quiet. The world tilted. I thought of the empty beds. The unanswered questions. The way cries sometimes seem to rise through the stone itself. "We can't leave them," I whispered. Rose looked at me for a long moment as if weighing my soul. "I was hoping you'd say that. We didn't plan everything at once. Plans like that get you killed. Instead, we gathered fragments. A hairpin hidden in a sleeve. Bread crusts saved from meals. A mental map of patrol routes and bell schedules. We learned which overseers slept heavily. Which ones paced all night. Which doors were locked out of habit rather than necessity. Hope became a dangerous thing. The night before the visitors arrived, the convent was restless. No one slept deeply. Even the walls seemed to hum with anticipation. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart pounding as questions clawed at me. What if we were wrong? What if we were caught? What if the truth was worse than we imagined? Near midnight, Rose appeared at my door, eyes reflecting candlelight like quiet fire. "Now or never," she said. We moved barefoot through the corridors, every step a prayer we no longer trusted. The chapel loomed ahead, dark and hollow in the moonlight filtering through stained glass. Rose knelt behind the confessional, fingers working quickly at the lock. It opened with a soft click. Behind it, stone steps descended into darkness. Cold air rose up to meet us, thick, damp, unmistakably alive. Rose took my hand. "Whatever we find," she whispered, "we don't turn back." I nodded, though terror threatened to undo me. As we stepped into the dark, the door swung shut behind us. And for the first time since I arrived, there was no light left above. If faith had been used to bury the truth, what would happen when we uncovered what was never meant to survive the light? The darkness below the chapel was thicker than night. It swallowed sound, swallowed breath. Even the courage I had gathered felt smaller with every step downward. The stone stairs were uneven, slick with moisture, and so narrow our shoulders brushed the walls. I counted each step without meaning to 1, 2, 3, until the numbers dissolved into dread. Somewhere below us something shifted. Rose tightened her grip on my hand. Neither of us spoke. Words felt too loud for a place that clearly survived on secrecy. At the bottom, the passage opened into a low corridor lit by a single weak lantern hanging from a hook. Its flame trembled as if afraid of what it illuminated. Wooden doors lined the walls, old, scarred, swollen with damp. Each had a small barred opening at eye level. That was when the smell hit me. Rot, sweat, illness, despair. I pressed my sleeve to my mouth, fighting the urge to gag. My knees threatened to give out, not from fear alone, but from recognition. This was where the missing girls went. This was where questions were buried. A sound came from behind one of the doors. A breath that didn't know how to be quiet anymore. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and peered through the bars. A girl sat curled on the stone floor, hair matted, skin gray with cold. Her eyes lifted slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening with sudden awareness. When she saw me, she crawled forward. "You're real," she whispered. I thought I was dreaming again. My chest cracked open. Rose moved past me, checking the other doors. Some were empty, some were not. "How long have you been here?" I asked the girl, my voice shaking. She frowned, as if the concept of time had been taken from her. "Long enough to forget my name." That sentence broke something inside me. They hadn't just locked these girls away. They had erased them. I turned to Rose, tears blurring my vision. "We have to get them out. All of them." Her face was tight with fear and resolve. "We can't carry everyone, but we can open the doors." She pulled the hairpin from her sleeve, hands trembling as she worked the first lock. It gave way with a soft snap. The door creaked open, and the girl inside flinched at the sound, shielding her eyes like a wounded animal. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're not alone." More doors opened. More faces emerged, some hopeful, some terrified, some already resigned to the idea that freedom was a trick. I helped one girl to her feet, feeling how light she was, how little remained of her. Then footsteps echoed above us. Rose froze. "They're early," she breathed. Panic surged through the corridor. Girls pressed against the walls, whispering prayers, sobbing, begging. My mind raced. There was no grand escape route. No miracle waiting to save us. Only choice. Rose grabbed my shoulders. Listen to me. If they find us together, they'll lock it all back up. Worse. What are you saying? I asked, though I already knew. Her eyes softened. You're stronger than you think. And they already watch me more than you. No, I whispered. I won't leave you. She smiled sadly. You already know how this works. Footsteps grew louder. Voices followed. Rose shoved the hairpin into my palm. Promise me, she said fiercely. Promise you won't forget us. My throat closed. I nodded. She stepped back into the shadows just as the lantern light shifted. A door slammed open above. Who's down there? A voice barked. I moved without thinking, slipping into a cell, pulling the door shut behind me. Heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I pressed myself into the corner as Boots descended the steps, lantern light slicing through the darkness. They passed my door. I didn't breathe until their voices faded. When I emerged hours later, the corridor was silent again. The doors were locked. Rose was gone. I stood there shaking, clutching the hairpin, knowing something irreversible had just happened. I had seen the truth, and the truth had taken someone I loved. If survival meant carrying guilt heavier than chains, what kind of freedom was I about to step into, and at what cost? They never accused me outright. That was the cruelest part. For days after that night I was watched, not openly, not violently, but with a new sharpness. I lingered too long. Questions were asked that weren't really questions at all. I was moved to different duties, kept away from Rose's usual corridors, as if separating me from her memory might make it easier to erase. No one spoke her name. It was as if she had never existed. The hairpin stayed hidden in my mattress, pressing into my ribs at night like a reminder I couldn't escape. I replayed that moment over and over. The way she pushed me back, the calm in her eyes, the certainty that she had already chosen her fate. Survival is not heroic when it comes wrapped in someone else's sacrifice. It is heavy. It is shameful. It asks questions you can never answer. Weeks passed. Then months. The visitors came and went. Smiles returned to the overseers' faces. The building exhaled, satisfied that its secrets were safe again. Life resumed its hollow rhythm, bells ringing like nothing had ever happened. But something had changed in me. I no longer believed escape would come from obedience. And I no longer believed silence was holy. The opportunity arrived without warning. One morning my real name, was spoken aloud for the first time since I arrived. I nearly collapsed. I was told I was being released. No explanation. No apology. Just papers signed, instructions given, a warning never to speak of what I had seen. I nodded through it all, hands shaking, heart numb. They gave me back my clothes. Older. Tighter. As if even fabric had moved on without me. When I stepped beyond the gates, sunlight burned my eyes. I had forgotten how wide the sky was. Freedom felt unreal. I expected relief, joy, gratitude. Instead, grief followed me like a shadow. I returned to a world that had no language for what I carried. My mother cried when she saw me, touching my face like she was checking if I was solid. My father never asked questions. Perhaps he already knew the answers and couldn't bear them. At night I dreamed of doors, of hands reaching through bars, of Rose's voice telling me to wake up. I tried to build a life. I married. I worked. I laughed when expected. But there was a part of me sealed off forever. A place that smelled of damp stone and unanswered prayers. Years passed. Decades. I learned that institutions like that don't fall quickly. They rot slowly, quietly, protected by fear and faith twisted just enough to confuse good people. I told no one. Not because I forgot, but because the world wasn't ready to listen. Until one winter evening many years later, when a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in a hand I hadn't seen since youth. It's time to open the doors. My hands trembled exactly the way they had that night beneath the chapel. I knew then that the past was not done with me, and that the place I had escaped all those years ago was calling me back one last time. If the truth had been buried for a lifetime, what would it demand when it finally came time to be unearthed? I returned 72 years after I first walked into that place without a choice. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown larger, wider in spirit, heavier with truth. The stone was cracked now, ivy crawling where authority once stood tall. The iron gates hung open, not triumphantly but tired, as if they had finally given up pretending. I stood there for a long time before stepping inside. The air smelled different, cleaner. But memory has its own scent, and it rushed at me all the same. My knees trembled as I crossed the threshold, the echo of my footsteps colliding with the ghost of a girl who had once believed obedience would save her. This time I was not alone. Journalists, advocates, lawyers, survivors, some with canes, some with scars no one could see. Women who had once been nameless now stood upright, their voices steady, their eyes unafraid. And me, Grace. Finally Grace again. They asked me where it happened. I led them past the chapel, my hand brushing the stone wall exactly where Rose had drawn that mark in the dust so many decades ago. The hidden door was no longer locked. It creaked open easily, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to tell the truth out loud. The steps were still there. So was the cold. As we descended, my heart pounded, not with fear this time but with something sharper. Purpose. The lanterns lit the corridor, revealing the doors that once erased girls from the world. I walked to the very first one, and I opened it. The room was empty now, bare, harmless looking. But I remembered. I remembered the girl who forgot her name, the breath that didn't know how to be quiet, the way Rose's hand had squeezed mine before letting go. I turned to the cameras, to the people listening, to the world that had finally decided to look. This is where they taught us silence, I said. My voice didn't shake. This is where faith was used as a weapon. This is where girls disappeared so others could feel righteous. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the hairpin. Rusty, bent, small. This, I continued, is what resistance looked like. The story broke open after that. Investigations followed. Records were uncovered. Names were restored. The institution did not survive the truth. Places like that never do once the doors are forced open by daylight. But justice is not a clean thing. It does not give back the years. It does not resurrect the lost. What it does give is meaning. Later that evening I returned alone. One last time. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and whispered, "We didn't forget you." For a moment the air felt warm. I don't know if it was imagination or grace or memory finally laying itself down, but I felt it. Peace. Not the fragile kind, but the earned kind. Now, when I wake at night, I no longer smell damp stone. I smell morning. I tell this story not because it is easy, but because silence is how cruelty survives. Because obedience without conscience is not faith. And because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is live long enough to tell the truth. The night the doors would not open shaped my life. But the day they finally did, that is when my story truly began. Evil thrives in silence, but it collapses under truth. And no matter how long it takes, every buried voice deserves to be heard.